The builder went bankrupt and was forced to buy an old barn for $300. But inside, he found the truth that someone had tried to hide. Look what had been hidden all these years. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are from. The last morning in Cleveland began the same way every other day had ended for Samuel Winters, with silence thick enough to press against his chest. The coffee on the table was cold, untouched since dawn. A thin stack of envelopes lay beside it, all with the same printed words he had come to dread. Final notice. The radiator groaned against the February chill, pushing out a weary hiss of heat that didn't quite reach the corners of the room. From the upstairs hallway came the faint creak of a door, then the small feet of his daughter padding toward the kitchen. Hannah was 8, still too young to understand the difference between worry and hunger. She climbed onto the chair opposite her father, clutching a half-broken toy rabbit. "Mom said we might move soon," she murmured. Samuel tried to smile but failed. "Maybe," he said. "Would you like that?" She shrugged. "Only if we go somewhere where the roof doesn't drip." When Lauren came down, still wearing her nurse's scrubs, the tired lines beneath her eyes seemed carved in. She poured the last of the coffee into her mug and leaned against the counter. "The bank called again," she said. Samuel nodded. "I know." Their son Nathan, 15 and perpetually angry, walked in and grabbed a piece of toast without looking at either of them. "You could just ask for your old job back," he muttered. Samuel didn't answer. He had once been a lawyer, a good one by reputation but not by heart, until he learned that justice was a service people paid for, not a principle they lived by. He had built houses for others since leaving the courthouse. Simple jobs, wood and nails, foundations that could not argue back. But construction contracts dried up when the economy did, and one bad winter turned savings into debt. They were now 3 months behind on rent, and the landlord had left a note tucked into the doorframe like a verdict. That night, while the others slept, Samuel sat before his old laptop, scrolling through pages of auctions and repossessions. Most were city properties beyond their reach, foreclosures that needed cash they didn't have. But then he found it. Wooden barn, 12 acres, Wayland County, interior converted to residential. Sale through court, $300. The photos looked wrong. The first showed a weather-beaten structure leaning under a gray sky, its paint blackened with rain. But the second was impossibly different. A warm wooden room with a stone fireplace and bookshelves lined with old volumes. He thought it might be a scam, yet something about it gripped him. He turned the screen toward Lauren. "You want us to live in a barn?" she asked, half amused, half exasperated. "I want us to live somewhere no one can take away," he said. She stared at the picture, at the glow of the interior. "It's $300, Sam. There's a reason for that." "Maybe the reason," he said quietly, "is that it's waiting for someone who needs it." They left 2 days later, driving west through the frost-bitten morning, their old truck loaded with boxes, tools, and the last of their hope. Nathan sat with headphones on, glaring at the road. Hannah drew shapes in the fogged window glass. Lauren kept her eyes on the horizon, as if afraid to look back at the city fading behind them. By the time they reached Wayland County, the sun had slipped behind a wall of clouds. The land was open and silent, fields of winter grass stretching toward a dark tree line. They stopped at a roadside diner, where a man in a worn cap looked up from his coffee as they entered. "You folks lost?" he asked. "Just passing through," Samuel said, "looking for an old property, a barn outside town." The man gave a slow nod. "You mean the Crowell place. That's not just a barn." Samuel frowned. "Crowell?" "Richard Crowell," the man said. "County attorney back in the day. Fought the wrong people. Some say he disappeared. Others say he built that barn to hide from them. Either way, no one's lived there since." He took a sip from his cup. Place has its ghosts. Hannah's small fingers tightened around her mother's hand. Lauren forced a polite smile, thanked the man, and hurried them back to the truck. The road out of town narrowed to a ribbon of cracked asphalt that curved through the hills. When the barn finally came into view, Samuel stopped breathing for a moment. It stood alone in a hollow, half swallowed by vines, its frame leaning but still proud, as if the earth itself refused to let it fall. They stepped out into the cold wind. The smell of pine and damp soil filled the air. Up close, the barn seemed larger, its planks dark but sturdy, the roof sagging under moss. A single wooden door, scarred by age, hung crooked on its hinges. Samuel hesitated before pushing it open. Inside was another world. Sunlight from a high window fell across polished beams, smooth floors, and a wide stone fireplace at the far end. The air smelled of cedar and old smoke. Dust danced in golden shafts of light. "Someone lived here," Lauren whispered. Her voice echoed softly. Near the fireplace, carved into a heavy ceiling beam, were the words, "The house does not fall while truth stands." Samuel traced the letters with his fingertips. The carving was deep, deliberate, as though whoever made it had needed to believe those words with every stroke of the blade. That night, they lit a fire and unrolled sleeping bags on the floor. The flames threw long shadows across the walls. Nathan lay with his back turned, pretending to sleep, while Hannah whispered that she could hear the barn breathing. Lauren brushed it off as imagination, but even she flinched when a board creaked overhead. In the morning, Samuel explored the upper floor. It was a maze of wooden rooms, a small bedroom, a study filled with books, a loft that smelled of paper and time. He found law journals, property records, and handwritten notes covering the desk. The name R. Crowell appeared again and again in the margins. Some pages were underlined, others marked with red ink that had bled into the paper like veins. Lauren found an old photograph in the kitchen drawer, a man in a suit, a woman beside him, and a young boy standing proudly before this very barn. On the back, someone had written, Richard, Mary, and Daniel, 1989. They began cleaning that afternoon. The work warmed them. Samuel repaired a broken window. Lauren scrubbed dust from the counters. Hannah swept the floors, humming softly. Even Nathan helped, dragging fallen branches from the porch. For the first time in months, they were doing something together. When evening fell, Samuel sat by the fire, staring at the carved words above him. He thought of his past, the years in courtrooms where truth had always come with a price tag. Here, surrounded by silence and wood and flame, he felt a strange kind of peace, as though the house itself forgave him for giving up on what he once believed. Later, while fixing the steps near the staircase, his hammer struck something hollow. Curious, he pried away a loose plank and found a narrow space beneath. Inside was an old iron box covered in dust. The lock crumbled when he touched it. He lifted the lid and froze. Inside were several yellowed folders stamped with the seal of the county court, a cassette tape labeled March 4th, and a letter folded with precise care. He unfolded it slowly. If you are reading this, I did not live to finish what I started. They took everything but the truth, and the truth is buried within these walls. The barn stands because the law does not. It was signed, Richard Crowell, County Attorney. Samuel sat there for a long time, the paper trembling in his hands. He felt the weight of the years between them. Two men on opposite ends of justice, bound by the same disillusionment. The fire crackled behind him, warm against the cold that had seeped into his bones. When Lauren found him, he was still staring at the letter. She read the first lines and looked at him in disbelief. "Sam, this is crazy. You don't even know if it's real." He nodded slowly. "Maybe not. but someone built this place to protect something. Maybe that means it's worth finding out what. That night, he placed the box on the table beside his sleeping daughter and sat watching the embers die down. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a voice too old to form words. And as the last spark faded, Samuel thought he heard footsteps above them. Steady, measured, the kind of footsteps that belonged to a man who once carried the law on his shoulders and refused to let it fall. When morning came, the sound was gone, but the letter remained, and so did the strange conviction that whatever had begun in this barn decades ago was not yet finished. Samuel stepped outside into the pale light, the cold biting his skin, and looked back at the wooden structure standing proud against the winter sky. He didn't know it yet, but the house that bore another man's truth was about to test his own. The first night after finding the letter, Samuel barely slept. The house whispered with every gust of wind, boards shifting, timbers murmuring like restless voices. He lay awake, listening, the letter from Richard Crowell folded under his pillow, as though it were a talisman. By dawn, he rose, lit the fireplace, and unlatched the old cassette player he had discovered inside the box. The tape was brittle but intact. He pressed play. A man's voice came through the static, firm but trembling at the edges. March 4th. They know what I've done. I've filed copies, but they've taken the originals. They think I'm afraid. There was the sound of a door creaking, a chair being dragged. If anyone finds this, understand their contracts were fraud. The farmers were never paid. They used me to legalize theft. Then a pause, and the voice softened. I built this place to hold the truth because the courts won't. A faint crackling filled the air, and then, like a whisper, carried through time. A house doesn't fall while truth stands. The tape ended in silence. Samuel sat for a long while, staring at the dead cassette. He had spent years in courtrooms, listening to testimony twisted into performance. Truth, there had been a costume. Here, it sounded like confession. He took the tape from the player and set it gently on the table. When Lauren entered, she frowned at the shadows under his eyes. You've been up all night again. He nodded. It's more than a story, Lauren. Crowell was uncovering a fraud. He died for it. She poured coffee, not looking at him. And now what? You'll finish his crusade? We came here to escape this kind of life, Sam. He didn't answer. Instead, he unrolled the documents from the box, leases, deeds, payment transfers, all bearing seals from the county courthouse. Several pages were signed by the same man, Mayor William Hayes. The name itched in his memory. He'd seen it once, years ago, on a zoning dispute case that had mysteriously disappeared before trial. When he stepped outside, the winter air bit at his face. The barn's wooden boards gleamed faintly under frost. Something about the structure seemed expectant, as if it waited for him to continue what Crowell had begun. He spent the day cataloging everything, labeling folders, copying each page by hand. It gave him purpose, a rhythm he hadn't felt since the days when law still meant something. Late afternoon brought a visitor. A pickup truck rolled up the dirt path, its tires crunching on ice. A man in uniform stepped out, his smile tight. Morning, Sheriff Peterson, he said, extending a gloved hand. We've had reports of someone moving onto the Crowell property. That you folks? Samuel nodded cautiously. We bought it at auction. The sheriff looked around the yard. Strange choice. Locals say the place is bad luck. You know what happened here? I've heard some, Samuel replied. The sheriff's eyes drifted toward the barn's door, then back to him. Best not to dig too deep into county history. Some things are better left to dust. His tone was courteous, but the warning was plain. Just keep to yourselves, Mr. Winters. Don't cause trouble." After he drove away, the silence seemed heavier. Lauren came out with her coat wrapped tight. What did he want? "To remind me who runs this place," Samuel said. That evening, while fixing loose boards near the back wall, he found another hidden cavity, a narrow drawer built into the floor. Inside lay a tape labeled Case 47 and a note scrawled in shaky handwriting. "For the one who listens." He played the new recording at dusk. Crowell's voice was lower now, urgent. "They've buried 30 years of fraud beneath this county. I filed copies under false names, but they'll come. If I disappear, tell the world what they've done. Tell them the law still breathes here." Then came a loud bang. Perhaps a door slammed shut, and the tape ended abruptly. The air in the barn felt suddenly colder. The fire flickered low. Hannah had fallen asleep near the hearth, her drawings scattered across the rug. One caught his eye, a tall man in a suit standing beside the barn, drawn in childish lines, but unmistakably deliberate. "Who's that?" he asked when she stirred. "The man from the stairs," she said drowsily. "He watches you build." A chill passed through him, but he tucked her in without comment. Upstairs, Nathan sat at the window, phone in hand, filming the yard below. "There's a truck out there," he whispered. Samuel looked. 2 dim headlights glowed at the edge of the trees, motionless. Then, after a moment, they flicked off. By morning, the ground was marked with deep tire tracks leading to the main road. On the barn door, carved roughly into the wood, were the words, "You're opening what you can't close." Lauren wanted to leave. Her voice trembled as she packed a box. "You think this is about justice, Sam, but it's about danger. Whoever hurt that man could hurt us." He tried to reason, but his conviction sounded hollow even to himself. "If I walk away, I'm no better than them," he said. This is why he built it to be found. The next day, he drove into town to the small library, hoping to find public records on the Crowell case. Most archives were missing. The librarian, an elderly woman, lowered her voice when he asked. "Those files were removed long ago. Mr. Crowell's work embarrassed the wrong people. Best you forget it." But she slipped him a business card. "If you want the truth, talk to Melanie Clark. She used to be a reporter." He met her 2 days later at a roadside diner, the same one from their arrival. She was in her 60s, sharp-eyed, carrying a notebook stained with coffee rings. When he explained what he'd found, she nodded grimly. "I remember the case. Crowell uncovered a land grab scheme. The company Wayland Development paid off half the county. He gathered proof, then vanished before he could testify. Official word was suicide. No body, though." "Do you believe that?" Samuel asked. "I believe he was silenced," she said. "And if you found his records, they'll come for you too. These men are still in power." When he returned home that evening, the barn was quiet. Too quiet. The floor hatch stood open. The iron box was gone. He ran through every room, heart hammering, but it was useless. Whoever had taken it knew exactly what to look for. Lauren sat at the table, white-faced. "I told you," she whispered. "Now they know we have it." He sank onto a chair, head in his hands. "It's not over," he said. He wouldn't have left just one copy. The wind outside picked up, rattling the loose shutters. Hannah's voice broke the tension. "Daddy," she said from the doorway. "The man was here again." He turned sharply. "What man?" She pointed toward the fireplace. "He left you something." In the ashes lay a small metal key, blackened with soot, and a half-burned envelope. Inside was a flash drive sealed in wax. Crowell's handwriting marked the paper. Second archive. Samuel exhaled shakily. He turned the key in his palm, feeling its warmth despite the cold. Somehow, the man who had built this house had thought ahead. leaving his truth in layers, each hidden deeper than the last. That night, he reassembled an old laptop from his toolbox, careful not to connect it online. The flash drive held hundreds of scanned files, court affidavits, bank records, memos between the mayor's office and Wayland Development, names, dates, signatures, proof. The fire burned low as he read, page after page, seeing patterns form a web of deceit stretching decades. Land seized under false pretenses, farmers forced out, families erased from maps. His stomach turned when he saw one familiar name, the construction firm he had once briefly represented as a young attorney, unaware of its ties to these same men. He felt sick. His silence back then had made him complicit. Upstairs, boards creaked again. Not the wind this time, measured steps crossing the floor. He rose, heart pounding, but when he opened the stairwell, only dust floated in the half-light. Yet something lingered in the air, the scent of smoke and faint cologne. He whispered into the emptiness, "I found it, Richard. I'll finish it." The flames behind him crackled higher, casting his shadow across the carved words above the mantel. The house does not fall while truth stands. For the first time, he understood what they meant. Truth wasn't a weapon. It was the structure itself, the thing that held a man upright when everything else gave way. When dawn came, Lauren sat beside him, pale and silent. "We can't stay," she said. He reached for her hand. "We can't run either." Nathan watched them both, uncertain. Outside, the light was weak, gray with snow. The house loomed steady against it, patient and waiting. What had begun as shelter was now something else entirely. A courtroom built of timber and memory, demanding its verdict. Samuel knew the trial wasn't over. Not for him, not for Crowell, not for anyone who had once believed the law could be pure. And as the day unfolded, he realized the barn had not chosen him by chance. It had been waiting for someone who still remembered how to listen. The morning after the second archive was found, Samuel stood by the doorway of the barn, staring at the horizon. The frost had turned to fog, a low white haze that blurred the line between the earth and the sky. Behind him, the fire from the night before had burned out, leaving only a bed of gray ash. He hadn't slept. The images from the flash drive kept flickering in his mind. Forged signatures, sealed contracts, maps redrawn with invisible lines of greed. Each document was another nail in the coffin of men who had built their fortunes on stolen land. But more than outrage, what filled him now was a strange sense of duty, as if the house itself had assigned him a task. He no longer felt like an intruder in someone else's story. He was part of it. Lauren watched from the kitchen doorway, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold. The exhaustion in her eyes was deeper than sleep could fix. "Sam," she said quietly, "what are you going to do with all of this?" He turned toward her, his face pale in the thin light. "I'm going to finish what he started. These files, they prove everything. If I bring them to the right people, they can't be ignored." She shook her head slowly. "You really believe the right people still exist?" Her voice cracked. "You think the truth matters to them?" It got him killed. He said nothing, but inside he knew she was right. Crowell had built a sanctuary of truth and been buried by it. Yet that same truth had survived because the man refused to destroy it. He felt that to walk away now would be betrayal, not only of Crowell, but of himself, of the lawyer he once tried to be before he started hiding behind wood and nails. That afternoon he called Melanie Clark. His voice was low, urgent. "I have more evidence," he said. "It's enough to reopen the case." She agreed to meet him the next evening in town. "Bring copies," she warned, "and don't tell anyone else." When he hung up, Lauren was standing behind him. "You're not doing this alone," she said. If you're going, I'm coming too." He looked at her. His wife, who had held him through every failure, who feared this house more than any storm, and knew arguing would break something in both of them. "All right," he said softly. "We'll go together." That night, snow began to fall, heavy and soundless. The barn glowed from within, the fire painting slow patterns across the walls. Hannah slept, curled near her mother. Nathan sat beside the window, restless. "They're watching us," he said quietly. "There's a car again, by the trees." Samuel looked, but the fog hid everything beyond the fence. "Maybe it's just the wind moving the branches," he said, though he didn't believe it. He stayed awake long after everyone else had gone to bed. The barn creaked in the wind, the beams shifting like old bones, settling into place. Around midnight, he heard a faint scraping metal against wood. He followed the sound to the front door, where a folded note had been wedged between the planks. The paper was damp, the handwriting unfamiliar. "Leave the past buried. Last warning." He stared at it for a long time before burning it in the fireplace. The flames licked at the edges until only black flakes remained. Then he turned off the lamps and went to bed. They left early the next morning. The drive into town was quiet, the roads slick with half-melted snow. At the diner, Melanie was already waiting, her notebook on the table, a recorder beside her. She listened as Samuel spread out the printed documents and spoke, his voice measured, but burning beneath the surface. He explained the chain of ownership, the shell companies, the fraudulent claims filed under the mayor's office. When he was done, she looked up, eyes shining. "This is enough," she said. "With what I still have from my old reports, we can publish. But it'll have to be quick. Once they know it's coming, they'll try to stop it." As they walked back to the truck, the wind cut sharp and clean. Lauren squeezed his arm. "Do you think this will finally end it?" she asked. "I don't know," he said, "but at least it'll begin something." They returned to the barn that evening, tired but lighter, as if the place had finally allowed them to breathe. The sky was purple with dusk. The children ran ahead toward the firelight glowing from the windows. For a moment, everything felt almost ordinary again, until Samuel noticed the faint scent of gasoline in the air. His heart stopped. He broke into a run. Smoke curled from the side wall, then burst outward as flame devoured the dry wood. "Get out!" he shouted. Lauren grabbed Hannah and Nathan, pulling them back toward the car. The fire spread faster than he could have imagined. The beams groaned, glowing red. The heat hit him like a wave. But the box, the letter, the tapes, everything was still inside. Without thinking, he plunged through the doorway. Inside, the air was a storm of heat and crackling wood. Flames climbed the staircase, licking the carved words above the fireplace. "The house does not fall while truth stands." The phrase burned gold before the smoke swallowed it. Samuel covered his mouth with his sleeve and pushed forward, coughing. He found the table overturned, papers scattered, embers curling the edges. The iron box lay near the hearth, blackened but intact. He seized it, the metal searing his palms. The smoke thickened, blinding him. A beam collapsed behind him with a roar. He stumbled toward the door, barely able to see. The world tilted. For a moment he thought he saw someone standing near the fireplace, a figure in a dark suit, unmoving amidst the fire. He blinked through tears and smoke, and the figure raised its hand, pointing toward the exit. Samuel staggered forward, his lungs burning, and fell through the doorway into the snow. Lauren screamed his name and ran to him. The children clung to her. Behind them the barn roared, flames clawing at the sky, like some ancient thing finally freed from silence. They watched until the roof collapsed and the glow dimmed to embers. Only the stone chimney remained, jutting from the ashes like a monument. Samuel's hands were blistered, his face streaked with soot, but he still held the box against his chest. "It's all here," he whispered hoarsely. 2 days later, the story broke. Melanie's article appeared online first, then spread to national outlets. Corruption scandal in Wayland County, evidence of fraud, and cover-up discovered. The names in the documents, Mayor Hayes, Sheriff Peterson, half the planning commission, were printed for everyone to see. Arrests followed within hours. The media called it the Barn Case. Reporters tried to reach Samuel, but he refused interviews. When one camera crew came to the property, he turned them away. "I didn't expose anything," he told them. "The truth was always here. I just opened the door." Winter gave way to spring, and the ashes of the barn sank into the thawing ground. Samuel rebuilt it himself, board by board, using the old beams that had survived the fire. Neighbors he barely knew began to stop by, offering tools, nails, paint. Even the ones who had once avoided him spoke of Crowell with newfound respect. The scandal had changed the town. For the first time in decades, people were willing to talk about what had been taken from them. Lauren helped with the restoration, sanding planks and sealing joints. Nathan filmed short clips for a school project, titled "How My Father Rebuilt a House That Burned Twice." Hannah spent her afternoons planting saplings where the old fence had stood. The land, once silent and bitter, seemed to breathe again. By midsummer, the barn stood tall once more, cleaner, stronger, but still recognizably the same. On the day the last beam was raised, Samuel took a chisel and carved into the wood above the hearth the words that had survived the fire in his mind. "The house does not fall while truth stands." The letters were deep and uneven, cut by his own trembling hands. When he stepped back, Lauren was behind him, her face soft with something between pride and peace. That evening they lit the first fire in the new hearth. The children laughed, their shadows dancing on the walls. Lauren leaned against Samuel's shoulder. "Do you still believe in the law?" she asked quietly. He watched the flames reflect in her eyes. "No," he said, "but I believe in what it should have been. And maybe that's enough." Outside, the fields shimmered in the fading light. Fireflies rose among the new trees Hannah had planted. The barn's windows glowed with warmth, as if the building itself had been waiting for this moment, to live again, not as a secret, but as a memory set free. Months later, the county converted part of the property into a small memorial. A plaque bore 2 names: Richard Crowell, 1948 and 1998, and Samuel Winters, keeper of the truth. Local students visited on field trips. Professors wrote essays about civic courage. Yet for Samuel, the meaning of it all was quieter. It was in the way Lauren smiled again when the mornings were still, in the laughter of his children echoing through the rafters, in the way the house no longer creaked from ghosts, but from life. One evening, as he closed the barn doors, he caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of his eye, a shadow by the old chimney. He turned and saw nothing, only the firelight trembling through the glass. But as he walked away, he thought he heard the faintest sound from within. The slow, steady tread of footsteps crossing the floor, and then a voice, soft as wind in the beams. "You did well." He stopped, heart still, then smiled. The barn behind him was silent once more, but not empty. It was whole. And as the stars came out over Wayland County, Samuel Winters finally understood that some houses never die. They simply wait for someone brave enough to listen. Subscribe for the next story. Share this video with someone who loves real stories, and don't miss what's coming next.